In a small town nestled between rolling hills and dense woods, life moved at a slow, predictable pace. The streets were lined with modest houses, their windows glowing warmly in the evenings as families gathered together after long days. Among these homes lived Sarah Thompson, a single mother whose quiet demeanor masked a life filled with challenges. At 32 years old, Sarah worked tirelessly to provide for her 8-year-old son, Ethan. Her mornings began before sunrise, serving coffee and breakfast at the local diner, while her nights ended late, cleaning offices in the city. Despite her exhausting schedule, Sarah always found time to bake cookies for school events or help neighbors carry heavy bags of groceries. To everyone around her, Sarah appeared to be just another hard-working woman doing her best to raise her child alone. But what no one knew, not even Ethan, was that beneath her calm exterior lay secrets buried deep within her past. Before she became a mother, before she settled into this sleepy town, Sarah had been someone entirely different. She was once part of an elite group of warriors trained to face danger head-on and survive against all odds. As a Navy SEAL, she had faced some of the most dangerous missions imaginable, honing skills that few could ever master. But those days felt like a lifetime ago now. Years earlier, Sarah's life took a dramatic turn during a mission that went horribly wrong. The details remained locked away in classified files, but the scars, both physical and emotional, stayed with her. Afterward, she made the difficult decision to leave the military behind, seeking refuge in anonymity. She wanted a fresh start, far from the chaos and violence that defined her previous existence. When she discovered she was pregnant with Ethan, shortly after leaving the service, Sarah vowed to build a peaceful life for herself and her unborn child. So, she moved to this quiet town, reinventing herself as an ordinary woman who simply wanted to live, without looking over her shoulder. Sarah's new life suited her well, at least on the surface. She immersed herself in routines, finding comfort in predictability. Ethan grew up believing his mom was invincible, often bragging to his friends about how strong and fearless she was. What he didn't realize was that much of what he admired about her wasn't exaggerated. It was true. Though Sarah rarely spoke of her past, there were moments when glimpses of her former self would shine through. Like the time she effortlessly fixed a leaky pipe in their basement using tools most people wouldn't know how to handle, or when she calmly talked down a barking dog that terrified everyone else on the block. These instances seemed minor to outsiders, but they hinted at a strength far beyond the ordinary. One crisp autumn evening, as golden leaves swirled in the wind, Sarah finished her shift at the office building and headed home. The streets were unusually empty, save for a group of young men lingering near the park where children usually played. They wore dark hoodies pulled low over their faces, their postures tense and menacing. Sarah noticed them immediately but tried not to draw attention to herself. Clutching her bag tightly, she quickened her steps toward her apartment building. Something about their presence felt off, like predators waiting for prey. As she approached the entrance of her building, 3 of the men suddenly stepped into her path, blocking her way. One of them smirked, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Hey lady," he called out, taking a step closer. "You got any cash on you? Or maybe something shiny we can take off your hands?" His tone was mocking, almost playful, as if he enjoyed intimidating strangers. Sarah froze for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. She glanced around, searching for any sign of help, but the street was deserted. Forcing herself to stay calm, she replied evenly, "I don't have anything worth taking." Her words came out steady, though her mind raced. She thought of Ethan upstairs, asleep in his bed. If these men followed her inside, if they threatened her son, she couldn't let that happen. The leader of the trio, emboldened by her lack of resistance, stepped closer still. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a switchblade, its blade glinting under the dim streetlight. "Don't play dumb with us," he growled, waving the knife inches from her face. "Hand over your purse." For a brief second, Sarah hesitated. Years of suppressing her instincts, of pretending to be someone weaker than she truly was, clouded her judgment. But then, as the man pressed the blade closer, something inside her snapped. Muscle memory took over, and her body reacted faster than her mind could process. In one swift motion, she grabbed the wrist holding the knife, twisted it sharply, and disarmed him before he could blink. The knife clattered to the ground, and the man stumbled backward, clutching his injured hand. His two companions lunged at her, shouting curses, but Sarah moved like water, fluid, precise, unstoppable. Every movement she made was calculated, every strike deliberate. Within seconds, the first attacker crumpled to the ground, clutching his stomach, while the second tripped over his own feet, trying to retreat. By the time the third man realized what was happening, Sarah had already pinned him against the wall, her forearm pressing firmly against his throat. "Stay down," she warned, her voice cold and commanding. The remaining attackers scrambled to their feet and fled, leaving their leader groaning on the pavement. Sarah stood perfectly still, her breathing rapid but controlled. Adrenaline coursed through her veins, sharpening her senses. It had been years since she'd tapped into this part of herself, and the rush of power startled her as much as it reassured her. When the initial shock wore off, reality hit hard. Sarah looked around, half expecting someone to have witnessed the altercation, but the street remained empty, silent except for the rustling leaves. She bent down to pick up the discarded knife, examining it briefly before slipping it into her pocket. Then, without another glance at the injured men, she turned and walked briskly toward her building. Inside her apartment, Sarah leaned against the door, letting out a shaky breath. Her hands trembled slightly as she set her bag down on the kitchen counter. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to confront the truth. Her past wasn't as buried as she'd hoped. The skills she'd worked so hard to suppress were still there, lying dormant beneath the surface, ready to emerge when needed. And now, thanks to tonight's encounter, her carefully constructed facade was beginning to crack. Unbeknownst to Sarah, word of the incident spread quickly through the neighborhood. A passerby had seen the commotion from a distance and reported it to the police. By morning, officers arrived at her doorstep, eager to piece together what had happened. Their questions probed deeper than Sarah anticipated, forcing her to tread carefully between honesty and secrecy. Meanwhile, the gang members she'd defeated weren't willing to let the matter rest. Humiliated and furious, they vowed revenge, setting the stage for a confrontation that would test Sarah's resolve and reveal even more about the extraordinary woman hiding in plain sight. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the thin curtains of Sarah's modest apartment, casting soft golden patterns on the walls. Ethan was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor as he flipped through the pages of his favorite comic book. His laughter filled the air, a sound so pure and innocent that it momentarily eased Sarah's tension. She stood by the kitchen counter, sipping her coffee while replaying the events of the previous night in her mind. The adrenaline rush had faded, replaced by a gnawing unease. What would happen now? Would the police dig too deep? Would those men come back for revenge? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Setting her mug down, Sarah hesitated before opening it. 2 police officers stood outside, one tall and broad-shouldered, the other shorter with a clipboard in hand. Their expressions were serious but not unkind. "Miss Thompson?" the taller officer asked, tipping his hat slightly. "We're here to ask you a few questions about last night's incident near your building." Sarah nodded, stepping aside to let them in. Her heart raced, though she kept her face calm. "Of course," she said, gesturing toward the small dining table. "Please have a seat." As they settled in, Ethan glanced up curiously from his spot on the floor. Sensing the tension, Sarah gave him a reassuring smile. "Hey, buddy, why don't you go play in your room for a bit?" she suggested gently. He obeyed without protest, disappearing into his bedroom with his comic book. Once Ethan was out of earshot, the officers got straight to the point. "We received reports of an altercation involving 3 individuals near your apartment complex. Last night," the shorter officer began, consulting his notes. "Witnesses claim you were involved. Can you tell us what happened?" Sarah took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "I was coming home from work late last night when 3 men approached me," she explained. They demanded money and pulled out a knife. I managed to defend myself and disarmed one of them. After that, they ran off. She spoke matter-of-factly, avoiding unnecessary details. The taller officer raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. You disarmed a man with a knife? He asked, leaning forward slightly. That's no small feat, ma'am. Most people wouldn't know how to handle a situation like that. Sarah shrugged nonchalantly, though her pulse quickened. I've taken some self-defense classes in the past, she replied smoothly. I guess it paid off. It wasn't a lie. She had indeed learned self-defense, but the extent of her training went far beyond anything these officers could imagine. The shorter officer scribbled something on his clipboard before speaking again. Do you recognize any of these men? He asked, sliding a photo across the table. Sarah glanced at it briefly, a grainy image of 3 young men, their faces partially obscured by shadows. She recognized them instantly but shook her head. Not really, she said evenly. It all happened so fast. The officers exchanged a glance, seemingly unsure whether to believe her story. Finally, the taller one stood up, offering a polite nod. Thank you for your time, Ms. Thompson. If we need anything else, we'll be in touch. With that, they left, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts once more. News of the incident spread quickly through the neighborhood. By mid-afternoon, whispers about the mysterious woman who had single-handedly taken down 3 armed attackers reached every corner of the community. Some residents praised her bravery, calling her a hero. Others speculated about her background, wondering how someone so unassuming could possess such extraordinary skills. At the diner where Sarah worked, customers peppered her with questions, though she deflected them with vague answers. Just lucky, I guess, she'd say with a shrug, hoping to steer the conversation elsewhere. But while the town buzzed with admiration, Sarah knew better than to feel safe. She understood the mentality of gangs. They didn't take humiliation lightly. Sure enough, later that evening, as she walked home from her shift, she noticed a group of unfamiliar men loitering near the same park where the first attack had occurred. They watched her intently, their eyes cold and calculating. Sarah's instincts screamed at her to turn around, but she forced herself to keep walking, maintaining a steady pace. When she finally reached her building, she locked the door behind her and peered out the window, confirming that none of them had followed her inside. That night, sleep eluded her. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside made her jolt awake. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. These men weren't amateurs. They worked for someone higher up, someone who wouldn't tolerate failure. If they discovered her true identity, if they realized she wasn't just a random waitress defending herself, they'd stop at nothing to retaliate. And worse, they might target Ethan. 2 days passed without further incident, but Sarah remained on edge. She avoided taking shortcuts through quiet streets, sticking to well-lit areas instead. She even started carrying pepper spray in her bag, though she doubted it would do much against trained thugs. Still, it gave her a sliver of reassurance. Meanwhile, the local news picked up the story, dubbing her the suburban warrior. Reporters camped outside her apartment building, eager for an interview. But Sarah ignored their calls and requests, keeping her curtains drawn tightly shut. Then, one afternoon, as Sarah cleaned offices in the city, she received a call from her neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins. "Sarah, dear," the elderly woman said anxiously, "there are some strange men asking about you. They're parked right outside my house and they look, well, dangerous." Sarah's stomach dropped. "Did they say anything specific?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "They mentioned your name and asked if I knew where you worked," Mrs. Jenkins replied. "I told them I didn't, but I'm worried, Sarah. This doesn't feel right." "Thank you for letting me know," Sarah said, her mind racing. "Stay safe, okay? Don't engage with them." After hanging up, Sarah leaned against the wall, her hands trembling. Whoever these men were, they meant business. She couldn't risk leading them back to Ethan, which meant staying away from home until she figured out her next move. But running wasn't an option, not permanently. Sooner or later, she'd have to face them. Later that night, as Sarah sat in her car parked on the outskirts of town, she allowed herself to reflect on her choices. Leaving the Navy SEALs had been the hardest decision of her life, but she'd done it to protect Ethan, to give him a normal childhood free from danger. Yet here she was, dragged back into a world she thought she'd escaped. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a text from an old friend and former teammate, Jake Reynolds. "Heard about your little adventure. Need backup?" Jake had always been fiercely loyal, someone she could trust with her life. For a moment, Sarah considered reaching out, but pride held her back. She'd spent years proving she could handle things on her own. Besides, involving Jake would only put him in harm's way. Instead, she decided to take matters into her own hands. Using skills she hadn't tapped into in years, Sarah mapped out a plan. First, she needed intel. Gangs operated like machines, each member playing a specific role. Find the leader, and you found the source of the problem. Through discreet inquiries and careful observation, Sarah identified the gang's ringleader, Marcus Kane, a ruthless enforcer known for his violent temper and insatiable thirst for power. Marcus wasn't just angry about the failed attack. He saw Sarah's actions as a direct challenge to his authority. In his twisted logic, backing down wasn't an option, which meant Sarah had two choices: wait for him to strike again or strike first. And waiting had never been her style. By the end of the week, Sarah had gathered enough information to act. Late one night, under the cover of darkness, she slipped into an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, a known hideout for Marcus and his crew. Moving silently, she navigated the labyrinthine corridors, her senses heightened. Every shadow, every sound was a potential threat, but fear no longer controlled her. Instead, it fueled her focus, sharpening her instincts. Finally, she found what she was looking for: Marcus himself, seated at a makeshift table surrounded by his cronies. Empty beer bottles littered the floor, and the air reeked of stale cigarettes. Sarah stepped into the dim light, her presence commanding immediate attention. "Looking for me?" she asked coolly, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Marcus's eyes narrowed, recognition flashing across his face. "So, you're the bitch who's been causing trouble?" He spat, rising to his feet. "Let's see how tough you are when you're outnumbered." Without hesitation, Sarah sprang into action, her movements precise and deliberate. Years of training kicked in, turning her into a force of nature. Fists flew, bodies crashed to the ground, and chaos erupted. But Sarah remained unshaken, her resolve unwavering. By the time reinforcements arrived, alerted by an anonymous tip, Marcus lay unconscious, tied up with his own belt. As dawn broke over the horizon, Sarah walked away from the warehouse, her body aching but her spirit unbroken. She had faced her fears, confronted her past, and emerged victorious. Yet she knew this victory came at a cost. Her secret was no longer entirely hers to keep. The world now knew there was more to Sarah Thompson than met the eye, and that knowledge carried its own set of dangers. The morning after Sarah's daring raid on the gang's hideout, the town buzzed with a mix of awe and disbelief. News of Marcus Kane's arrest spread like wildfire, fueled by eyewitness accounts from officers who had arrived to find the notorious gang leader hogtied and surrounded by his groaning henchmen. The story painted Sarah as a real-life action hero, someone who had single-handedly dismantled one of the most feared criminal operations in the area. Reporters swarmed her apartment, building again, microphones thrust forward and cameras flashing as they begged for an interview. Neighbors whispered excitedly about the suburban warrior, marveling at how such an unassuming woman could possess such incredible strength and skill. But Sarah wasn't celebrating. Instead, she sat alone in her kitchen, staring blankly at the steam rising from her cup of coffee. Her body ached from the fight. Bruises bloomed across her arms and ribs, and her knuckles were raw. But it was the weight of what she'd done that truly burdened her. For years, she had worked tirelessly to keep her past hidden, to protect Ethan from the dangers that came with knowing who she really was. Now, thanks to her confrontation with Marcus and his gang, cracks were beginning to form in the walls she had so carefully built around her secret. Ethan shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He noticed the bruise forming on his mother's cheek and frowned. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, concern etched on his young face. Sarah forced a smile, ruffling his hair affectionately. "I'm fine, sweetheart," she reassured him. "Just a little accident at work." It was a lie, of course, one of many she had told over the years. But it was easier than explaining the truth. How could she tell her son that his mom was once a Navy SEAL? That she had faced death countless times and now found herself entangled in violence again? Despite her attempts to shield Ethan, he wasn't entirely oblivious. Over dinner the previous night, he had asked why people kept calling her a hero. "Is it true, Mom? Did you beat up those bad guys?" His tone had been equal parts admiration and curiosity. Sarah had hesitated before answering. "They weren't very nice people, and I did what I had to do to stay safe," she said simply. Ethan beamed, clearly proud of her. But Sarah felt a pang of guilt. She hadn't wanted this life for him, a life where his mother might always be looking over her shoulder, ready to fight. As days turned into weeks, Sarah tried to return to some semblance of normalcy. She resumed her routine, early mornings at the diner, late nights cleaning offices, and weekends spent baking cookies or helping neighbors with errands. Yet nothing felt quite the same. Strangers approached her on the street, thanking her for standing up to the gang. Some even asked for advice on self-defense, convinced she held the answers to becoming fearless. Sarah politely declined their requests, uncomfortable with the attention. She didn't want to be seen as a hero. She just wanted to live quietly, without drawing notice. Still, there were moments when she couldn't escape the spotlight. One afternoon, while picking Ethan up from school, she overheard two teachers discussing her exploits. "Can you believe it?" one of them said, shaking her head. "A single mom taking down armed criminals, it's like something out of a movie." The other teacher nodded enthusiastically. "And have you seen her? So unassuming. You'd never guess she's capable of, well, all that." Sarah pretended not to hear, focusing instead on greeting Ethan as he ran toward her. But their words lingered in her mind long after she left the school grounds. She hated being the center of attention, especially when it came to something as dangerous as her past. Every conversation, every glance reminded her of how fragile her anonymity had become. If word reached the wrong ears, if anyone connected her to her former life, it wouldn't just endanger her. It would put Ethan in harm's way too. To make matters worse, Sarah began noticing subtle signs that her actions hadn't gone unnoticed by others in the criminal underworld. A black sedan parked outside her apartment complex for hours at a time. An unfamiliar man loitered near the diner during her shifts, watching her closely. Even the parking lot at her office cleaning job seemed eerier than usual, with shadows moving between cars under the dim glow of streetlights. Sarah knew better than to dismiss these details as mere coincidences. Someone was keeping tabs on her, testing her limits. Her unease grew stronger one evening when she returned home to find her front door slightly ajar. Heart pounding, she pushed it open cautiously, scanning the room for intruders. Everything appeared undisturbed at first glance, the furniture untouched, the curtains drawn. But then she spotted it, a folded piece of paper resting on the dining table. With trembling hands, she unfolded it to reveal a single sentence scrawled, in bold letters. "You think this is over?" Sarah's blood ran cold. Whoever wrote the note wasn't bluffing. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was a warning. They knew she was no ordinary woman, and they intended to use that knowledge against her. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but she pushed it aside, forcing herself to think clearly. Running wasn't an option, not with Ethan depending on her. She needed a plan, a way to protect both herself and her son. That night, unable to sleep, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, poring over old contacts from her Navy SEAL days. She had sworn off reaching out to anyone from her past, fearing it would only drag her deeper into the world she had left behind. But desperate times called for desperate measures. After much deliberation, she dialed Jake Reynolds' number. Jake had been her closest teammate during her military service, a man whose loyalty and resourcefulness had saved her life more times than she cared to admit. Though they hadn't spoken in years, she hoped he would understand the gravity of her situation. Sarah, Jake's voice sounded surprised but warm when he answered. Been a while. What's going on? I need your help, Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. She explained everything, the gang attacks, Marcus Kane, the mysterious note, and listened as Jake absorbed the information. When she finished, there was a long pause before he spoke. You're in deep, aren't you? He said finally. But don't worry. I've got your back. Relief washed over Sarah, though it was tinged with guilt. She hated involving Jake, knowing it could put him in danger. Still, she couldn't deny the comfort of having someone she trusted by her side. Over the next few days, Jake sent her encrypted messages containing surveillance footage and intel on potential threats. Together, they pieced together clues pointing to a larger operation targeting Sarah, a rival gang eager to exploit her skills for their own gain. Armed with new information, Sarah devised a strategy to end the threat once and for all. She couldn't rely solely on brute force this time. She needed to outsmart her enemies. Using Jake's intel, she identified key locations where the rival gang operated and began gathering evidence of their illegal activities. Late at night, she slipped into warehouses and abandoned buildings, planting tracking devices and documenting transactions. Each mission carried immense risk, but Sarah moved with precision, her training guiding her every step. One evening, as she reviewed the footage she had collected, Sarah realized she had enough to take down the entire operation. All she needed was proof of collaboration between the rival gang and corrupt officials within the police department, a connection that would expose the rot festering beneath the surface. Determined, she set her sights on infiltrating a high-stakes meeting scheduled to take place in an underground bunker. The night of the meeting, Sarah dressed in dark clothing, blending seamlessly into the shadows as she approached the bunker. Armed with gadgets provided by Jake, she disabled security cameras and neutralized guards stationed outside. Inside, she watched silently as gang leaders negotiated deals with men in suits, their voices dripping with greed. As she recorded the exchange, Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction. This was it, the final blow that would dismantle the network threatening her family. But as she prepared to leave, one of the guards spotted her. Alarms blared and footsteps echoed through the corridors. Sarah sprinted toward the exit, her heart racing. Bullets whizzed past her, shattering glass and ricocheting off metal walls. Just as she reached the doorway, a searing pain shot through her leg. She stumbled but refused to fall, dragging herself outside and disappearing into the darkness. Collapsed. Against a tree several blocks away, Sarah called Jake. I'm hit, she gasped, clutching her wound. But I got the evidence. Get it to the authorities. Jake's voice was firm. Hold on, Sarah. Help's coming. As sirens wailed in the distance, Sarah closed her eyes, exhaustion washing over her. She had done everything she could to protect Ethan and ensure justice prevailed. Whatever happened next, she knew she had fought for what mattered most. The days following Sarah's daring escape from the underground bunker were a blur of pain, fear, and determination. Her leg injury, a bullet graze that tore through muscle, left her limping and weak, but she refused to let it slow her down. Jake had arrived just in time, whisking her away to a safe house he owned on the outskirts of town. It was a small cabin surrounded by dense woods, isolated enough to shield them from prying eyes. There, Sarah rested uneasily, her mind racing, with thoughts of Ethan and the evidence she had risked everything to obtain. Jake tended to her wound with practiced hands, his expression grim as he cleaned and bandaged it. You're lucky it wasn't worse, he muttered, wrapping the gauze tightly around her thigh. Next time, don't go in alone. His tone carried a mix of frustration and concern, but Sarah didn't respond. She stared out the window, watching the trees sway in the wind. Jake's words echoed in her head, but she knew there wouldn't be a next time. This was the end game, the culmination of weeks of danger and sacrifice. Either the evidence would bring justice or it would destroy her completely. By the second day at the cabin, Sarah felt restless. Every moment spent away from Ethan felt like an eternity. She called Mrs. Jenkins, the elderly neighbor who often looked after him, to check in. He's fine, dear, Mrs. Jenkins assured her over the phone. "But he misses you terribly. Keeps asking when you'll come back." Hearing this broke Sarah's heart, but she couldn't afford to rush home. Not yet. The rival gang was still out there, and until their operation was dismantled, returning meant putting Ethan directly in harm's way. Jake worked tirelessly during those days, ensuring the evidence Sarah had gathered reached the right people. He encrypted the recordings and documents before sending them anonymously to trusted contacts within law enforcement agencies. Meanwhile, Sarah focused on healing, though her body protested every movement. At night, she lay awake, replaying the events leading up to her injury. The adrenaline of the mission had masked the pain at first, but now, each twinge reminded her of how close she had come to failure. Failure wasn't an option, not for Ethan, not for herself. 3 days later, the first domino fell. News outlets erupted with reports of a massive police raid targeting organized crime syndicates across the region. Dozens of arrests were made, including high-ranking officials implicated in corruption. The public outcry was immediate and fierce, with citizens demanding accountability and reform. For Sarah, however, the victory felt hollow. While the arrests marked a significant blow to the criminal network, she knew better than to believe the threat was entirely gone. Gangs like these operated like Hydra heads. Cut one off and 2 more sprouted in its place. Still, the raids bought Sarah some breathing room. With most of the key players behind bars, the remaining members scattered, regrouping in smaller factions too disorganized to pose an immediate danger. Jake confirmed this development after speaking with his contacts. "It's safe to go back for now," he told her one evening as they sat by the fireplace. "But stay vigilant. These guys don't forget easily." Sarah nodded, though her stomach churned at the thought of returning to her old life. Could she truly go back to being a waitress and cleaner, pretending nothing had changed? The truth was, she no longer recognized the person she used to be. The cracks in her carefully constructed facade had widened, exposing parts of herself she had buried long ago, and while she hated the attention her actions had brought, she couldn't deny the sense of purpose she felt when fighting for what was right. When Sarah finally returned home, Ethan greeted her with a hug so tight it nearly knocked the breath out of her. "I missed you, Mom," he said, tears streaming down his face. Sarah held him close, kissing the top of his head. "I missed you too, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Seeing him safe erased some of the weight pressing down on her shoulders, but it also reinforced why she had taken such drastic measures. Ethan deserved a life free from fear, a life where his mother didn't have to constantly look over her shoulder. Over the next few weeks, Sarah tried to rebuild a semblance of normalcy. She resumed her shifts at the diner and office cleaning job, though her movements were slower due to her injury. Neighbors stopped by occasionally, offering kind words and homemade meals. Some even asked if she planned to pursue a career in law enforcement given her skills. Sarah laughed off their suggestions, insisting she was happy with her current life. But privately, she wondered if they were right. Was there a way to use her abilities for good without sacrificing the peace she craved? Her answer came unexpectedly, one afternoon while volunteering at the local community center. A group of teenagers approached her, asking if she could teach them self-defense techniques. At first, Sarah hesitated, unsure if she wanted to share that part of herself with others. But then she remembered the fear in their eyes, the same fear she had seen in countless victims throughout her military service. If teaching them how to protect themselves could empower even one person, wasn't it worth it? With Jake's encouragement, Sarah agreed to lead a weekly class at the community center. Word spread quickly, and soon the sessions were packed with participants of all ages. Sarah taught them basic moves, how to break free from grabs, disarm attackers, and assess dangerous situations. Her lessons weren't just physical. She emphasized mental toughness and situational awareness, sharing stories, lightly altered, from her own experiences. The students admired her strength and wisdom, though none suspected the full extent of her background. Ethan watched proudly from the sidelines as his mom transformed into a mentor and role model for so many. One evening, as they ate dinner together, he asked, "Mom, are you happy doing this?" Sarah paused, considering the question. Teaching self-defense wasn't something she had ever imagined herself doing, but it gave her a sense of fulfillment she hadn't felt in years. "Yes," she replied honestly. "I think I am." But happiness didn't mean complacency. Sarah remained cautious, always aware of the lingering shadows of her past. Though the immediate threat had subsided, she knew better than to let her guard down completely. Crime never truly disappeared, it simply adapted. To prepare for whatever might come next, she continued training in secret, honing her skills and staying sharp. Jake visited regularly, bringing updates on any suspicious activity related to gangs or organized crime. Together, they formed a silent pact. No matter what happened, they would protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Months passed, and life in the small town settled into a new rhythm. The arrests had sent shockwaves through the community, prompting calls for systemic change. Local leaders vowed to root out corruption, and citizens rallied together to support initiatives aimed at reducing crime. Sarah played a quiet but vital role in these efforts, using her influence to advocate for programs that empowered vulnerable populations. Her classes became a cornerstone of the community center, drawing praise from parents and educators alike. Yet despite the progress, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her battle was far from over. Late at night, when the world was quiet and Ethan slept soundly beside her, she would sit by the window staring at the stars. Memories of her time as a Navy SEAL haunted her dreams, reminding her of the sacrifices she had made and the lives she had saved, or failed to save. Each scar, whether visible or hidden, told a story of resilience and loss. One particularly restless evening, Sarah pulled out an old photo album from the back of her closet. Flipping through its pages, she revisited moments from her past, grinning, alongside teammates during training exercises, standing tall after completing a mission, holding Ethan for the first time. Tears welled in her eyes as she reflected on how far she had come, and how much farther she still had to go. Life as a single mother, a former soldier, and now a teacher, was anything but easy. But it was hers, shaped by choices she had made and battles she had fought. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Sarah closed the album and placed it back in its hiding spot. Rising from her chair, she stretched her injured leg, testing its strength. Pain lingered, but it no longer held her back. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she would face them head-on, with courage, determination, and love for the son who depended on her. After all, heroes weren't born, they were forged in the fires of adversity. And Sarah Thompson was proof of that. Months turned into a year, and life in the small town began to stabilize. The arrests of key figures in the criminal underworld had sent ripples through the community, sparking conversations about safety, justice, and reform. Sarah Thompson's role in exposing the corruption remained shrouded in mystery, though rumors continued to swirl. To most, she was simply the woman who stood up to the gangs, a symbol of resilience and bravery. But for Sarah, the quiet period brought both relief and unease. She knew better than anyone that peace was often fleeting, a fragile illusion easily shattered by greed, violence, or revenge. Her self-defense classes at the community center flourished, drawing students from all walks of life. Teenagers eager to learn basic techniques mingled with adults seeking confidence in their daily lives. Even some elderly residents joined, determined to protect themselves from potential threats. Sarah approached each lesson with patience and care, tailoring her methods to suit individual needs. Her teaching style wasn't just about physical strength. It emphasized mental fortitude, quick thinking, and empathy. "The strongest weapon you have is your mind," she would say, her voice steady and reassuring. "Use it wisely." Ethan thrived in this new chapter of their lives. Now 9 years old, he grew more curious and outspoken, often asking questions about his mother's past. One evening, as they sat together on the couch watching a movie, Ethan turned to her with wide eyes. "Mom, are you really as tough as everyone says?" he asked, half teasing but clearly intrigued. Sarah chuckled softly, tousling his hair. I'm tough when I need to be, she replied. But being strong isn't just about fighting, okay? It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. Though Sarah enjoyed the admiration her son showed, she couldn't shake the guilt gnawing at her conscience. Every time Ethan looked at her with pride, she wondered if she was doing enough to shield him from the darker aspects of her life. He deserved innocence, laughter, and freedom, not the weight of knowing his mother had once been a soldier trained to kill. Yet deep down, Sarah realized she couldn't keep hiding forever. Secrets had a way of surfacing, especially in a world where information traveled faster than ever before. One crisp autumn morning, Sarah arrived at the diner to find an unfamiliar man sitting at the counter, nursing a cup of coffee. His appearance was unremarkable. Average height, plain clothes, neatly trimmed beard, but something about him set off warning bells in her mind. When he glanced up and caught her eye, his lips curved into a faint smile. "You must be Sarah," he said casually, extending a hand. "I've heard a lot about you." Sarah froze for a moment, her instincts screaming caution. She forced herself to remain calm, shaking his hand briefly. "And you are?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral. "Detective Mark Harris," he introduced himself, flashing a badge clipped to his belt. "Mind if I ask you a few questions?" Her stomach tightened. Detectives rarely sought her out unless trouble was brewing. Still, she nodded politely and gestured toward an empty booth. "Sure. What's this about?" Mark slid into the seat across from her, his expression serious yet non-threatening. "We've been investigating recent reports of gang activity, resurfacing in nearby towns," he explained. "Some of our sources suggest these groups might be connected to the ones you helped dismantle last year. Have you noticed anything unusual lately?" Sarah hesitated, weighing her response carefully. She hadn't encountered any direct threats recently, but Jake's updates hinted at scattered attempts by remnants of the old network to regroup. Sharing too much could put her and Ethan in danger, while withholding information might hinder efforts to stop them. "Not directly," she admitted finally, "but I've heard whispers here and there. People seem nervous." Mark nodded, thoughtfully, jotting notes in a small notebook. "If you see or hear anything specific, please let us know. Your insight has been invaluable in the past." Before leaving, he handed her a business card. "Call anytime, day or night." As Sarah watched him walk away, her grip tightened on the mug in front of her. The resurgence of gang activity meant the fragile peace she had worked so hard to build was under threat again. She couldn't afford to ignore it, not when Ethan's safety hung in the balance. That evening, Sarah called Jake, updating him on her encounter with Detective Harris. "It sounds like they're testing the waters," Jake said after listening intently. "These guys won't risk another high-profile operation right away. They'll start small, petty crimes, intimidation tactics to rebuild trust among their ranks." "What do we do?" Sarah asked, frustration creeping into her voice. "I can't keep looking over my shoulder forever." "You don't have to," Jake reassured her. "But staying informed is crucial. Keep your ears open and let me handle the rest. If they make a move, we'll be ready." Over the next few weeks, Sarah followed Jake's advice, subtly gathering intelligence without drawing attention to herself. She eavesdropped on conversations at the diner, observed suspicious behavior in public spaces, and even revisited areas where gang members used to gather. Each piece of information she collected added to a growing puzzle, one that painted a troubling picture. The gangs weren't just regrouping, they were targeting individuals who had played roles in bringing them down, and Sarah's name topped their list. One chilly November night, as Sarah walked home from her office cleaning job, she sensed someone following her. Her heart raced as she quickened her pace, clutching the pepper spray tucked inside her coat pocket. Turning a corner onto a quieter street, she spun around abruptly, ready to confront whoever lurked behind her. Instead, she found herself face to face with Detective Harris. "Sorry to startle you," he said quickly, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "I saw you walking alone and wanted to check if everything was okay." Sarah exhaled sharply, her nerves fraying. "You scared me half to death," she muttered, trying to steady her breathing. What are you doing here? Harris hesitated, glancing around as if ensuring no one else was nearby. I didn't want to alarm you earlier, but we intercepted a message suggesting you're being targeted, he confessed quietly. I'm supposed to keep an eye on you until we neutralize the threat. Anger flared within Sarah. Why didn't you tell me sooner? She demanded, her voice low but sharp. Do you have any idea how dangerous this is for me and my son? I understand your frustration, Harris replied earnestly, but revealing too much could compromise the investigation. Please, trust me. We're doing everything we can to protect you. Though reluctant, Sarah agreed to cooperate, for Ethan's sake. Over the following days, Harris became a constant presence, blending seamlessly into her routine. He accompanied her to work, attended her self-defense classes undercover as a participant, and even joined her for coffee breaks. While his company provided a measure of security, it also reminded Sarah of the invisible chains binding her to her past. Despite the heightened precautions, tension simmered beneath the surface. One afternoon, during a particularly lively session at the community center, Sarah noticed a man lingering near the entrance, his gaze fixed on her. Instinctively, she dismissed the class early, ushering her students out through a side door. As the room emptied, she approached the stranger cautiously. Can I help you? She asked, her tone firm. The man smirked, stepping closer. Just admiring your skills, he said mockingly. Word is you're quite the fighter. Sarah's muscles tensed, prepared for a confrontation. But before either of them could react further, Detective Harris appeared, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. Is there a problem here? He asked pointedly, glaring at the intruder. The man backed off, raising his hands in mock surrender. No harm intended, he muttered before slipping away. Though outwardly calm, Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. That night, as Sarah tucked Ethan into bed, she found herself reflecting on the fragility of their newfound stability. The shadows of her past loomed larger than ever, threatening to engulf the life she had fought so hard to create. Yet amidst the uncertainty, one thing remained clear. She would never stop fighting for her son. No matter what challenges lay ahead, Sarah vowed to stand firm, to protect, to endure, and to rise above. Because heroes aren't born, they choose to act when others hesitate, and Sarah Thompson had chosen her path long ago. As winter settled over the small town, a thick blanket of snow covered the streets and rooftops, muffling the usual hum of daily life. For Sarah Thompson, the season brought a mix of beauty and unease. The holidays were approaching, and with them came decorations, carolers, and cheerful gatherings. Yet beneath the festive cheer, tension simmered. Detective Harris continued his discreet surveillance, blending into the background as he monitored for any signs of danger. Jake checked in regularly, updating Sarah on developments from his end. Despite their efforts, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to break. Her self-defense classes became more than just lessons. They turned into a sanctuary. The students looked up to her not only as a teacher but also as someone who embodied resilience. Many shared stories of how her guidance had helped them feel safer in their own lives. One woman, a single mother like Sarah, tearfully thanked her for giving her the confidence to stand up to an abusive ex-partner. Another student, a shy teenager named Mia, credited Sarah with helping her overcome bullying at school. These moments reminded Sarah why she had chosen this path, to empower others and create a ripple effect of strength and courage. But even amid these victories, Sarah remained vigilant. She knew the gangs weren't idle. Their whispers grew louder, their movements bolder. Late one evening, as she walked home from the community center, she spotted graffiti scrawled across a nearby wall. You can't hide forever. The message sent chills down her spine. It wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of intent. They were watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The turning point came on a bitterly cold December night. Sarah had just finished cleaning offices downtown when Detective Harris intercepted her outside the building. His face was grim, his breath visible in the frosty air. We need to move you and Ethan tonight, he said urgently. They've Been spotted near your apartment complex. Sarah's heart sank. What about Ethan? She asked, panic rising in her chest. He's already asleep at home. I'll take care of him, Harris assured her. Go pack essentials. We don't have much time. Racing back to her apartment, Sarah worked quickly, stuffing clothes, documents, and a few cherished belongings into a duffel bag. Her hands trembled as she moved, adrenaline coursing through her veins. When she entered Ethan's room, she found him curled up under his blankets, fast asleep. Kneeling beside him, she gently shook his shoulder. Ethan, wake up, sweetheart, she whispered. We're going on a little trip. Ethan blinked groggily, confusion clouding his features. Where are we going? He mumbled. It's a surprise, Sarah lied, forcing a smile. Come on, get dressed, we'll talk about it later. Within minutes they were bundled into Harris's car, speeding away from the neighborhood. As they drove, Harris explained that a rival gang faction had been traced to a warehouse on the outskirts of town. Intelligence suggested they were planning a retaliatory attack, targeting Sarah directly. We're moving you to a safe house until we neutralize the threat, he said firmly. Jake is meeting us there. Ethan clung to Sarah's hand, sensing her anxiety despite her attempts to mask it. Are we in trouble, Mom? He asked softly. No, baby, she replied, squeezing his fingers reassuringly. I promise everything will be okay. The safe house was a secluded cabin nestled deep in the woods, far from prying eyes. Jake greeted them warmly, ushering them inside and lighting a fire to ward off the chill. For the next several days, Sarah, Ethan, and Jake stayed hidden, relying on updates from Harris and other trusted allies. During this time, Sarah grappled with guilt and frustration. She hated being forced into hiding, unable to confront her enemies head-on. But Jake reminded her constantly that patience was key. You've done enough fighting for now, he said firmly. Let us handle this. Meanwhile, Ethan adapted surprisingly well to their temporary refuge. He explored the snowy woods with Jake, built snowmen in the yard, and marveled at the simplicity of life without distractions. Watching him laugh and play brought Sarah a measure of peace, reminding her what she was fighting for. Still, she couldn't ignore the gnawing sense of responsibility, the knowledge that she alone could end the cycle of violence threatening their lives. On Christmas Eve, the operation to dismantle the remaining gang network reached its climax. Armed with evidence gathered by Harris and his team, law enforcement launched a coordinated raid on multiple locations simultaneously. The warehouse serving as the gang's base of operations was stormed, resulting in numerous arrests and the seizure of weapons, drugs, and incriminating documents. Among those detained was the leader of the faction targeting Sarah, a man known only by his alias, Viper. News of the takedown spread quickly, bringing relief to the community. Residents celebrated openly, lighting candles and sharing meals, to mark the occasion. For Sarah, however, the victory felt bittersweet. While justice had been served, she couldn't help but wonder how long it would last. Crime was a hydra. Cut off one head and another would rise in its place. By New Year's Day, Sarah and Ethan returned home, greeted by neighbors eager to celebrate their safe return. Life slowly resumed its rhythm, though Sarah remained cautious. She continued, teaching self-defense, advocating for systemic changes within local law enforcement, and mentoring young people determined to make a difference. Her story inspired countless others, proving that ordinary individuals could achieve extraordinary things when driven by love and conviction. One evening, as fireworks lit up the sky to welcome the new year, Sarah stood on her porch with Ethan by her side. Wrapping an arm around his shoulders, she gazed at the dazzling display, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Happy New Year, sweetheart," she murmured, kissing the top of his head. "Happy New Year, Mom," Ethan replied, leaning into her embrace. In that moment, surrounded by light and hope, Sarah allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a brighter future. Heroes weren't born, they were made, forged in the fires of adversity and driven by love. And Sarah Thompson had proven time and again that she was exactly the kind of hero the world needed.